Stone remembers cold the way skin remembers grief. Long after the cause is gone, the chill remains. The east tower of Calder House had not been warmed in 40 years. Its steps spiraled upward in the dark, each riser worn smooth at the center from boots that no longer climbed them. The door at the top was oak, iron-banded, the latch so thick with dust that the metal beneath was invisible. No light showed beneath it. No sound came from behind it. The corridor below was cold in the ordinary way of old stone, mineral, patient, indifferent. But the air near the tower staircase was different. It was colder. Measurably, deliberately colder, as though the temperature dropped with each step climbed, as though something above was drawing the warmth out of the air and keeping it. A draft moved downward from the sealed door. It carried the scent of old cloth and something faintly metallic, old as dried blood on iron, like a coin held too long in a closed fist. Nell Burrows stood at the base of the staircase on her first morning at Calder House. The estate ledger was under her arm. A pen rested behind her ear. She looked up at the darkness above and noted, without yet understanding it, that the shadow on the staircase wall did not match the angle of the corridor lamp. The lamp was behind her and to the left. The shadow should have fallen right and downward. Instead, it stretched upward toward the sealed door, as though cast by someone standing at the top of the stairs. Someone who was not there. Mrs. Aldrin appeared at her shoulder. The housekeeper moved quietly for a woman of her years. "The east tower is Lord Calder's private rooms," Mrs. Aldrin said. "The door stays shut." Nell noted it. She noted everything. She turned back toward the office and opened the ledger and began to work. That was 3 weeks ago. The door had stayed shut, until it did not. Proctor's office was on the county high street, above a printer's yard. The smell of ink and hot metal came up through the floorboards. Nell found it steadying. She sat across from Mr. Proctor with the estate ledger open on the table between them and her hands flat on the cover, and she waited for him to finish arranging his document case. He arranged it with care. He placed it at the table's center, not to one side, not near himself. At the center, where it divided the table like a claim of territory. He was a compact man with a practised face and a suit that cost more than it should have on a county solicitor's salary. "Mrs. Burrows," he said. The pause before her name was brief but deliberate, a small performance of courtesy that was not courtesy at all. "Mr. Proctor." He opened the case and removed a folded document. He did not hand it to her. He read from it. "The Calder estate has shown no evidence of active management for 14 months. Under the abandonment provision, the county may compel sale." Nell opened the ledger. She turned it to face him and indicated the columns with one finger. Tenant payments, current. Repair schedules, itemized. Correspondence with the county surveyor, dated and signed. Proctor examined the pages. He took his time. Then he smiled. It was a practiced expression, the kind that had been used so often it had worn a groove in his face, and it did not reach his eyes. "A widow playing steward is not stewardship," he said. "It is charity." The magistrate beside him wrote something down. Nell's hand tightened on the ledger spine. The leather creaked under her fingers. Her jaw set. Her eyes burned dry, and she did not look away from Proctor. She aligned the ledger's edge with the table edge, a small, precise movement, the gesture of a woman who controls what she can when she cannot control the room. "The accounts are current," she said. "The tenants are paid. The property is maintained." The accounts are in disorder, Mrs. Burrows. Another pause before her name. Your late husband's work, I imagine. She knew the accounts were not in disorder. She had kept them herself for 8 years, first beside Edmund and then, in the last 2 years of his illness, alone. She knew every column, every entry, every figure. The ledger on this table was correct. She said nothing further. She closed the ledger. She noted the magistrate's expression, not hostile but not convinced. Proctor had prepared him. The meeting had not been a discussion. It had been a demonstration. She carried the ledger back to Calder House in the afternoon light and went directly to the office. The office was on the east side of the house, a long room with 2 windows and shelves that held 8 years of estate records in Edmund's careful hand and 4 years in hers before that. She set the ledger on the desk and opened her personal copy beside it. She found the first discrepancy in under a minute. 3 figures had been changed. Not large amounts. The alterations were small, careful, designed to look like arithmetic errors rather than interference. A tenant payment recorded 10 shillings short, a repair cost inflated by 15, a quarterly balance that no longer matched the sum of its parts. Individually, each looked like carelessness. Together, they built a picture of mismanagement. The ink on the altered entries was not her ink. She kept a specific bottle, a dark blue-black that dried with a slight sheen. The new entries were matte, darker, a different formulation entirely. She opened the desk drawer. A second pen lay at the back, behind her ruler. She had not put it there. She went to the door. Mrs. Aldrin. The housekeeper appeared from the corridor. She had the look of a woman who had been nearby without being obvious about it. "Who has been in the office while I was at the county?" Nell asked. "Mr. Firth brought a man to check the drains," Mrs. Aldrin said. "A clerk," he said. "I did not recognize him." Nell looked at the altered figures. She looked at the pen. "The drains are on the west side. The office is on the east." Mrs. Aldrin's expression did not change. "Yes," she said. "I thought that was odd." The fire in the grate flickered. It dimmed without any draft to explain it. The room was colder than when Nell had left it. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough that she noticed the change on the back of her neck, a prickling awareness of temperature that had no source she could identify. Something had passed through the room while she was away. Or something remained in it still. She squared the stack of invoices on the desk, tapping their edges even, and turned back to the ledger. She worked through the night. By 3 in the morning she had mapped the full pattern of the sabotage. Every altered figure supported Proctor's claim. Every change was small enough to be attributed to incompetence, large enough to matter in a tribunal. Whoever had done this understood accounts. They understood how a case was built from accumulated small failures rather than one visible crime. She needed the original property deeds. She needed the founding accounts, the records from the estate's establishment that would prove continuous management across centuries, records that no amount of recent alteration could touch. If those existed, Proctor's abandonment claim collapsed entirely. She went to the door again. Mrs. Aldrin was in the kitchen. The housekeeper looked up without surprise. "The original deeds," Nell said. "The founding accounts. Where are they kept?" Mrs. Aldrin set down her cup. She was quiet for a moment. Not reluctant, Nell thought, but measuring something, deciding how much to say and in what order. "The records room was in the East Tower," Mrs. Aldrin said. "Lord Calder moved everything there after—" She stopped. "After his private matter. 40 years ago." The tower that is locked. The tower that was locked. Mrs. Aldrin picked up her tray. I checked the latch this morning. It seems to have come loose. She did not look at Nell when she said it. She moved toward the corridor and did not look back. Nell stood in the kitchen doorway. The corridor stretched ahead of her, and at its far end, the staircase rose into darkness. The shadow on the wall stretched upward, the same wrong angle she had noticed on her first morning. Still stretching toward the sealed door, still shaped like something that was not there. She went to the side table and took a candle. She lit it from the kitchen lamp. The flame steadied immediately, burning straight and clean in the still air. She tucked the ledger under her left arm. The pen was already behind her ear. She ran her finger down the column of figures one last time, finding the last error, marking it in her mind, closing the account of what had been done to her. Then she put her foot on the first stone step. The cold pressed down from above like a hand laid flat against the top of her head. The candle flame did not waver, neither did she. The shadow on the wall stretched upward ahead of her. She climbed toward it. The door at the top waited in the dark, its latch no longer sealed, its dust disturbed by a hand that was not hers. She climbed. She climbed. The cold thickened with each step, not the cold of stone in winter, mineral and patient. This was something else, something that pressed against the skin and stayed there, the way a held breath stays in the chest. The candle flame burned straight. No draft reached this staircase. The air was sealed, old, undisturbed. And yet the flame leaned, not toward the door above, but toward the wall, as though something on the other side of the stone was drawing it sideways. Nell kept her hand steady. The ledger was under her left arm. The pen was behind her ear. She put her palm flat against the tower wall and felt the cold move through her fingers like water. The door was oak, iron-banded, exactly as it had looked from below. Up close, the iron was not rusted. She had expected rust. The bands were dark with age, but the metal was sound, maintained, the hinges set with care into the stone frame. She pressed the latch. The door opened without sound. The hinges did not creak. They moved in perfect silence, oiled and true, as though someone had tended them recently. As though someone had not wanted the door to announce itself. Nell stood in the opening and held the candle up. The room was round, the walls following the curve of the tower. Large, larger than she had expected from the staircase's narrow spiral. The ceiling was high and lost in shadow. Every surface held dust, a gray, even layer, undisturbed except for a narrow path near the far wall where the floorboards showed darker wood beneath. Cloth covers draped over shapes she could not immediately name. A wardrobe, she thought, from the height of one. A chair, a low table. A form of some kind near the window, taller than a chair, narrower. The window itself was shuttered, the shutters closed, no light entering from outside. A writing desk stood near the center of the room. Its surface was gray with dust. A clock sat on the mantelpiece above a cold hearth. Its hands stopped at 11:20. The clock face was porcelain, painted with small blue flowers. The flowers were still bright beneath the dust. Nell moved into the room. Her footsteps were loud on the floorboards. She heard each one clearly. She heard nothing else. She set the candle on the writing desk. The light reached the first layer of the room. The covered shapes, the desk, the clock, and stopped at the far wall, where the darkness was thicker. Not ordinary darkness. Something denser. Something the candlelight touched but did not penetrate. as though the shadows there had weight and substance and had been gathering for a very long time. She pulled the first cloth cover, a portrait. A woman, dark-haired, painted in a style Nell placed at early century, 1810, perhaps 1820. The woman was smiling, not a formal smile, not the composed expression of a commissioned portrait. A real smile, caught mid-thought, the kind that reached the eyes. The frame was heavy, gilded, the gold undimmed. Someone had cared for this frame. Someone had kept it clean while everything else in the room gathered dust. Nell pulled another cover, a dress form with a gown on it. Green silk, the bodice intact, the hem perfect. She touched the fabric. Her fingers left marks in the dust on the skirt. She pressed deeper to the silk beneath. No moth damage, no rot, no brittleness in the weave. The silk was pristine, as though it had been hung here yesterday and not 40 years ago. She rubbed a fold between her fingers, and the fabric moved with the suppleness of something alive. She withdrew her hand. The marks her fingers had left in the dust remained. The candle flame bent, not toward the window, not toward the door behind her. It bent toward the far corner, toward the thick darkness, leaning at an angle that had no source in any draft. The room was sealed. The air was still. The flame bent as though drawn by something that wanted the light closer. Nell looked at the corner. He was sitting in a chair. He was not asleep. His eyes were open. He was looking at the portrait she had uncovered. The woman with dark hair. The woman with the real smile. And his expression was not grief or anger or surprise. It was stillness. The particular stillness of someone who has been sitting in one place for a very long time and has forgotten the impulse to move. His clothes were not dusty. He was not dusty. His coat was dark, well cut, the fabric unmarked. His hands rested on the chair arms, still as the hands of the stopped clock on the mantelpiece. Everything in the room had 40 years of dust on it. Except him. Nell's hand found the edge of the desk. She gripped it. The wood was solid under her fingers, and she held it and did not move. "Lord Calder." He did not respond immediately. His eyes moved from the portrait to her. The candlelight caught them, and they were not the gray-green she had been told to expect. They were amber. Dark, deep amber, the color of something old held to a flame, a color that did not exist in ordinary light. "You lit a candle," he said. His voice was quiet. It carried without effort in the sealed room, the way sound carries in a church. "I need the property records," she said. The shadows around his chair did not fall away from the candle. They gathered toward him, pooling at his feet, thickening at the chair's base like something that belonged to him, like something that had followed him here and stayed. The temperature near him was colder than near the door. The sealed room should have been uniform. It was not. A pause. Long. She did not fill it. "They are in the desk," he said. "Second drawer." She did not move immediately. She looked at him, at the chair, at the shadows that gathered rather than scattered. "How long have you been sitting here?" she said. Another pause, longer than the first. "I am not certain," he said. She opened the second drawer. The property records were there, wrapped in oilcloth. The cloth tied with cord that had dried and stiffened with age. She lifted the bundle onto the desk and untied the cord. The oilcloth fell open. The paper inside was old, She could see that from the color, the weight of it, but preserved, kept dry, the edges intact. She pulled the first deed and held it to the candle. Original deeds, founding accounts, a chain of ownership stretching back to 1706, each document in sequence, each one bearing a signature at the foot of the page. She checked the boundary descriptions against her memory of the current survey. The boundaries matched. Every one. Proctor's claim of abandonment required a break in the chain of management. There was no break. Continuous ownership, documented, unbroken, from 1706 to the present day. She turned to the next deed, and the next. The same name appeared on each one. Calder, Calder, Calder. No first name changes, no generational transfers, no son inheriting from father, no widow administering for a minor heir. Just Calder, signing the same way, the same hand, the same pressure on the pen, for 300 years. She looked at Dorian. These deeds are signed by the same hand, she said. Yes, he said, for 300 years. Longer, if you check the box beneath. She looked down. Beneath the oilcloth bundle, at the back of the drawer, a small wooden box sat flush against the drawer's base. She did not open it yet. She looked at the deeds in her hand. She looked at the signature. She looked at him. A sound on the stairs. Nell turned. Mrs. Aldrin appeared in the doorway. The housekeeper carried a lamp, its light warmer than the candle, and she held it steady as she took in the room. The uncovered portrait, the disturbed dust, Nell at the desk, and Dorian in the chair. Her expression did not change. She looked at Dorian the way she looked at a room that had finally been aired, with the practical recognition of something that had needed doing. "You will need tea, Mrs. Burrows," Mrs. Aldrin said. "You have been in the cold too long." She did not offer tea to Dorian. She did not look at him with surprise. She set the lamp on the mantelpiece beside the stopped clock and folded her hands and waited. "In a moment," Nell said. She turned back to the room. The covered objects, the portrait with its gilded frame, the green silk gown, pristine beneath its dust. The clock stopped at 11:20. "Who was she?" Nell said. Dorian did not answer immediately. The silence stretched. The lamp threw his shadow against the curved wall. The shadow was wrong. It fell at the wrong angle, stretching away from the light, pooling in the corner behind him. "Margaret," he said. "She managed this house better than any steward I ever employed." He paused. "She grew old. I did not. That is what immortal means. Not that you cannot be harmed, that you cannot follow." Nell looked at the portrait, at the smile that had been caught mid-thought, at the green silk dress on the form, Margaret's size, Margaret's decade, kept here in the dark for 40 years without rotting. At the clock, stopped at a time that had meant something once to someone who had not wanted the hands to move past it. She ran her finger down the spine of the property deed, checking the binding, feeling the stitching hold firm beneath her touch. "You kept everything," she said. "I could not touch it." His voice was quiet. It carried no self-pity. It carried the weight of a man stating a fact he has lived with for a very long time. "I could not remove it. I could not stay away from it." Mrs. Aldrin made no sound by the mantelpiece. She was looking at the stopped clock with the expression of a woman who had known this room existed and had chosen, for 22 years, not to open its door. Nell squared the stack of deeds against the desk surface. She aligned the edges, tapped them even, the oilcloth wrapping smoothed flat beneath her hands. The documents were in order. The chain was unbroken. Everything Proctor had built his case upon was about to be dismantled, deed by deed, signature by signature, in front of a magistrate who had not yet made up his mind. She picked up the bundle. "I need these for the tribunal," she said. "I will return them when Proctor is dealt with." Dorian nodded. One small movement of his head. He had not shifted in the chair. He had not moved toward her or away from her. He remained exactly as she had found him, still as the clock. His amber eyes returned to Margaret's portrait, as though Nell's presence was an event that moved around him without disturbing him. She walked to the door. The candle she had brought was burning low. The flame had shrunk to a small, guttering point, the wax nearly gone. It threw less light now. The shadows in the room deepened as she moved away from the desk, thickening at the corners, gathering most densely around the chair where Dorian sat. She paused in the doorway. The portrait of Margaret was uncovered, the dust disturbed around its frame, the first light since Margaret's death still touching the painted face. The smile was unchanged. The green silk dress caught the last of the candle's warmth and held it, the fabric glowing faintly in the dimming light. Behind her, Dorian had not moved. The candle flame shrank to nothing. The darkness took the room back. Nell stood at the threshold, with the deeds under her arm and the dead candle in her hand, and the cold of the tower pressed against the back of her neck, and she understood, with the precise clarity of a woman who has spent 8 years reading what figures do not say, that the name on those deeds was not a family name passed down through generations. It was one man's name, written in one man's hand, for 300 immortal years. She put her foot on the first step down and did not look back, and the darkness behind her was absolute. And somewhere within it, a man who had not aged in 40 years sat beside the portrait of a woman he had watched grow old, and the shadows gathered around him like something that had always known where he was. She had work to do. Proctor arrived the following morning. He came with the magistrate, a Mr. Graves, who wore the expression of a man who had been promised this would take an hour. He came with 2 surveyors carrying measuring chains and a leather satchel between them. He came with his document case, which he set on the estate office desk the moment he entered, the leather slap of it against the wood, deliberate and unhurried, a small act of territorial claim. Nell was already at the desk. She had been there since 6. The original deeds from the tower were laid out in sequence. 3 centuries of property records, each one cross-referenced against the estate ledger she had rebuilt from the founding accounts. The ink on the oldest pages had faded to brown. The signatures had not changed. Proctor examined them without touching them first. He stood with his hands behind his back and looked at each page the way a man looks at something he hoped would not exist. Then he smiled. "These are dated 1706, he said. "Where have they been for the past 40 years? "In the owner's private archive." Nell kept her voice level. "Where records belong." Proctor lifted one page by its corner. He held it to the light from the window. The magistrate moved closer. The surveyors stood near the door with their chains and said nothing. "The owner has not been seen in this county for decades." Proctor set the page down. The smile did not leave his face. "How do I know these are genuine and not forged by a desperate widow?" The word landed where he intended it to land. Nell ran her finger down the column of the founding accounts. The numbers were correct. She had checked them 3 times that morning, tracing each figure with the tip of her finger, the ink steady beneath her touch, the chain of ownership unbroken from 1706 to the present day. The act of tracing them steadied her hand now. "The signatures are consistent across 3 centuries," she said. "The paper stock is period appropriate. The notarial seals are intact. You are welcome to have them examined by any document expert the magistrate chooses." Proctor turned to the magistrate. He was no longer looking at Nell. "I request a full tribunal," he said, "and I request the owner appear in person to verify these documents. If Lord Calder does not appear, the estate is abandoned by definition." Mr. Graves wrote something in his notebook. The scratch of his pen was the only sound in the room. Then the fire in the study grate went out. Not died down, not guttered. It extinguished. One moment the coals were burning, orange and steady, and the next they were black and cold, and no smoke rose from them, and the room dropped in temperature so fast that Nell saw her own breath mist in front of her face. Proctor looked at the dead grate. His smile thinned. 3 weeks, Mr. Graves said, without looking up from his notebook. "The tribunal will convene in 3 weeks. Lord Calder must be present or represented by legal counsel with verified authority." He closed the notebook. He nodded to Proctor. He did not nod to Nell. They left. The document case went with them. The measuring chains rattled against the doorframe as the surveyors filed out. Nell stood in the cold room beside the dead fire and did not move for a long moment. 3 weeks. She went to find the provenance documents. The gallery ran the length of the east wing, a corridor of portraits in gilded frames, most of them shrouded in the same gray dust that covered everything in the house that had not been touched since Calder sealed the tower. Nell moved along the wall with her lamp, lifting the edges of the dust sheets, checking the small brass plates at the base of each frame for dates and names. She found it near the far end. No dust sheet. This one had been left uncovered, or uncovered at some point, and never reshrouded. The frame was gilded, the same style as the portrait in the tower. The brass plate read, "Lord D. Calder, 1762. Nell held the lamp closer. Same face, same hands, same ring on the 3rd finger of the right hand, a dark stone in a plain setting. The man in the portrait was looking slightly to the left of the painter, his expression carrying the particular quality she had already learned to recognize. Not absence exactly, but a kind of patient distance, as though the moment being captured was one of thousands he had already outlasted. She had seen the deeds. She had felt the cold that came off him like stone in January. She had watched his shadow fall at the wrong angle in a room with a single candle. She had understood it on the tower stairs last night, with the precise clarity of a woman who reads what figures do not say. But standing in front of a portrait dated 1762, looking at a face she had seen last night in a chair in a locked tower room, made it a different kind of knowing. "Mrs. Burrows." Mrs. Aldrin's voice came from the gallery entrance. She was carrying a lamp of her own. She came to stand beside Nell without hurrying, without apparent surprise at what Nell was looking at. They stood together in front of the portrait for a moment. "He is immortal," Nell said. Mrs. Aldrin was quiet for a beat. "That is one word for it. Vampire King is another. The estate workers used to whisper it. Now no one remembers." Nell's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the gallery wall. The stone was cold under her palms, solid, unyielding, real. She pressed harder. The trembling moved up through her wrists, and she pressed harder still, the cold of the stone seeping into her skin, and she breathed through her nose, and she held the wall until the shaking slowed. The air in the gallery tasted of dust and old varnish. The lamp flame was steady. The portrait watched the space to its left. "You have known for 22 years, Nell said. "I have worked for him for 22 years. Mrs. Aldrin's voice was dry and even. "What he is has never changed how he pays or how he treats the house." Nell took her hands off the wall. She looked at them. The trembling had stopped. Her palms were red from the cold stone. "Proctor wants him to appear at the tribunal, in person." Mrs. Aldrin said nothing for a moment. Then, "He has not left that tower in 40 years. Nell looked at the portrait, at the ring, at the patient, distant expression of a man who had been sitting in a locked room for 4 decades with a stopped clock and Margaret's gown and a portrait of a woman he had watched grow old. "Then we lose the estate," Nell said. She took the lamp from the gallery wall bracket and went to the tower stairs. This time she brought the oil lamp from the study. The flame was larger, steadier, and it threw light further up the stairwell as she climbed. Her footsteps were the only sound. The stone was cold through the soles of her shoes. The door at the top was as she had left it, unlocked. She pushed it open. Dorian was where she had left him. The chair, the dark corner, the portrait of Margaret uncovered, the painted face catching the new lamplight and holding it, the smile unchanged. The clock on the mantelpiece was stopped at 20 past 11. The room smelled of cold stone and old silk, and something else, something that had no name she knew, like the air before a storm that has not yet decided to break. Nell set the lamp on the desk. The room filled with more light than it had held in 4 decades. The corners retreated, the shadows pulled back from the walls. The gown on the form glowed faintly, the fabric catching the warmth of the flame and holding it the way fabric holds warmth when it has been waiting a long time. Dorian did not move. He watched her set the lamp down. His eyes were amber in the larger light, the color that did not exist in ordinary rooms, and the shadows around him did not retreat the way the others had. They stayed close to him, gathered at his shoulders and at the edges of the chair, as though the light had agreed to leave that particular space alone. "Proctor wants you at the tribunal," Nell said. "If you do not appear, he takes the property." "Then he takes it." The words were quiet. No anger in them, no self-pity, the same quality as everything he said. A man stating a fact he has already made peace with, or believes he has. Nell looked at the portrait of Margaret, at the stopped clock, at the dress that had not rotted in 4 decades. "Margaret managed this house," she said. "You said so yourself. You kept everything she touched for 40 years because you could not let go of what she built. And now you will let a solicitor with a document case take it apart because you cannot leave this room." Her voice cracked on the last word. She had not intended it. The crack was small, a single fracture in the composure she had maintained since Edmund died, since Proctor first called her a charity case in front of the magistrate's clerk, since she had stood in this room last night and understood what the name on those deeds meant. The crack was small, but the tower was sealed, and the silence caught it and held it. She gripped the desk edge. Her knuckles went white against the wood. "I am not Margaret," she said. Her voice was steady again, barely. "And I am not afraid of what you are. I am afraid of what Proctor will do if those records are questioned and you are not there to verify them." Dorian looked at her. The shadows around him shifted, not away from the lamp, inward. They contracted, pulling toward him, tightening, as though something in him was gathering itself from a long distance. His eyes were fully amber now, lit from within in a way the lamp alone could not account for. And the temperature in the room dropped another degree, and the air tasted of cold and old blood, and the candles on the mantelpiece, unlit, their wicks cold, trembled in no wind. "You brought a lamp this time," he said, "not a candle." The candle was not enough light. He was still for a moment. The particular stillness she had noticed before, not the stillness of a man at rest, but the stillness of something that does not need to move, that has learned over centuries to hold itself in perfect suspension while the world continues around it. Then he stood. He had been sitting in that chair for weeks. He rose from it the way a man rises who remembers the mechanics of standing, but has not practiced them recently. Deliberate, careful, as though testing whether the floor would hold him. He was taller than she had registered in the dark. The lamplight caught the ring on his right hand, the dark stone, the plain setting, the same ring from the 1762 portrait, the same ring from every deed she had read. "When is the tribunal?" he said. 3 weeks. He nodded. One small movement. The shadows at his shoulders did not ease. Nell turned to the mantelpiece. She had not planned this. She had planned to take the deeds and go. She had planned to descend the stairs and draft the response to the magistrate's notice and prepare the provenance file, and not think about what she had seen in the gallery, or what she now understood about the man standing behind her. She had not planned to touch the clock, but she was standing in front of it, and the key was on its chain beside the face, and the hands were stopped at 20 past 11, and she understood, with the same clarity that had been her only reliable tool since Edmund died, that a stopped clock was not grief preserved. It was grief calcified. It was the difference between a wound kept clean and a wound kept closed. She opened the glass face. She lifted the key. The mechanism resisted. 40 years of stillness in the gears. The springs wound down to nothing. The escapement seized with disuse. She turned the key and felt the resistance push back against her fingers, and she turned it again, steady, not forcing it. The way she turned the pages of a damaged ledger, with enough pressure to move it and enough care not to break it. The mechanism caught. The ticking filled the room, small, precise, steady, each beat distinct in the sealed silence of the tower, the sound of time resuming after a 40-year interruption, the sound of something that had been held in suspension finally released. She closed the glass face. Behind her, Dorian had not moved. She did not turn to look at him, but she heard, or felt, the distinction uncertain in a room this cold and this still, the small sound of his hands closing at his sides, and then opening. "Time does not stop because you want it to," she said. She picked up the deeds from the desk. She took the lamp. She walked to the door and put her foot on the first step down. The ticking followed her. Small and steady and relentless, it carried down the stairwell, each beat a fraction quieter than the last as she descended, but not stopping, not fading to silence, persisting. Below her, the estate waited. The gallery with its uncovered portrait, the study with its dead fire, the magistrate's notice on the desk with its 3-week deadline. Above her, at the top of the stairs, a man who had not left that room since the clock stopped was standing for the first time. The lamp threw her shadow long and angular against the curved stone wall. The deeds were under her arm. The ticking of the clock came down through the stone itself, through the walls, through the soles of her shoes on each step. She did not look back. Behind her, at the top of the stairs, Dorian stood in the lampless dark, not following, not yet. The county hall smelled of damp wool and coal smoke. Nell arrived early. She set the founding deeds on her table, squared the edges against the wood, and waited. Proctor was already seated at the opposite table. His document case was open. He had 3 clerks with him. He did not look at her when she entered. That was its own kind of statement. The magistrate took his seat at the front. The surveyors from the estate visit arranged themselves in the gallery. Behind them, near the back wall, stood a cluster of estate workers, men who had looked through her for weeks, who had taken their instructions and then done as they pleased. Mr. Firth was among them, his hat in his hands, his expression carefully neutral. Nell set her pen beside the inkwell. She aligned the stack of invoices with the edge of the table. She waited. Proctor rose. He had the practiced ease of a man who had done this before and expected to do it again. "The owner of the Calder estate has not appeared," he said. "He has not appeared in 40 years. The property has been without active management, without a resident owner, without any verifiable occupancy. The abandonment claim stands on its own evidence." He paused. He let the silence do its work. "The widow currently occupying the steward's post has no legal standing to contest this claim. She was appointed informally, without documentation, by a deceased husband, whose own appointment was never formally renewed. The estate is, in every meaningful sense, ownerless." The door opened. It did not bang. It did not creak. It simply opened, and the cold that entered with it was not the cold of a November morning. It was a different cold entirely. The fire in the grate burned lower. The shadows in the far corners of the hall deepened, thickening at the edges, pulling inward as though something had drawn the light toward a single point. The Vampire King walked into the county hall. He wore a dark coat, formal, the cut of another decade entirely. It fit him as though it had been made yesterday. His boots made no sound on the wooden floor. None. Not a single footfall registered in the silence of the room, and the silence itself seemed to notice this and to hold its breath around it. He walked to Nell's table. He stood beside her. The magistrate straightened. One of the surveyors leaned toward another and said something too low to hear. The workers at the back shifted. Mr. Firth's hat turned in his hands. Proctor's hand stopped over his document case. Dorian looked at the magistrate. His eyes were amber in the gray morning light of the hall, lit from somewhere the hall's windows could not account for. The Vampire King's shadow on the wall behind him stretched longer than his height. It reached toward Proctor's table as though measuring the distance between them. "Mrs. Burrows has my full authority," he said. "Mr. Proctor does not." His voice was quiet. The room heard it clearly. Proctor recovered faster than Nell expected. He was a procedural man. Procedure was his armor. "The court requires documentation of. These records show continuous management of this estate since 1706. Dorian opened the founding deeds on the table. His hands were steady. The dark stone of his ring caught the light. "Mrs. Burrows recovered £300 in uncollected rents in 4 weeks. She identified systematic alterations to the accounts, alterations that originated from a clerk placed in the estate office by Mr. Proctor's recommendation." He turned to the magistrate. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "The abandonment claim is fraudulent. The widow is the only person who has managed this property competently in the last year." Proctor stood. His face had gone a particular color. "These records were unavailable until Mrs. Burrows entered my private archive and retrieved them." Dorian's gaze moved to Proctor. It stayed there. which she did because your clerk was sabotaging the accessible records. The magistrate looked at Proctor. A long look, the kind that required no words. Proctor sat down. His document case stayed closed. One of the surveyors in the gallery said, quietly but audibly, "The deeds are genuine. We saw the estate records ourselves." The other nodded. Neither looked at Proctor. The magistrate made a notation. He did not ask Proctor to speak again. Dorian turned to face the room. He reached into his coat. He drew out a key. Iron, old, heavy. The kind of key that opened every door in a house because it was made when the house was built and had never been duplicated. He held it out to Nell. The cold moved outward from his hand. It reached her fingers before the iron did. "This is yours," he said. "It has always been yours. I should have given it sooner." Nell took the key. The weight of it settled in her palm. She closed her fingers around it. At the back of the hall, Mr. Firth removed his hat. He did not speak. He did not need to. He held it at his side and looked at the floor, and that was enough. Mrs. Aldrin stood at the side of the room near the wall, her hands folded in front of her. She said nothing, but her chin lifted slightly. The particular satisfaction of a woman who had left a tower door unlocked and been entirely right about what would follow. The magistrate dismissed the claim. He used precise language: fraudulent interference with estate records, clerk to be examined, proctors standing before the court to be reviewed. He said it all in the tone of a man who had seen procedural predation before and found it tiresome. Proctor left without speaking. His clerks followed. The document case went with them, still closed, everything inside it now useless. Nell set the key beside the deeds. She squared the edges of the papers against the table. Her hands were steady. "He will not try again," Dorian said. "No," she agreed. "He will not." She wrapped the deeds in their oilcloth and tucked them under her arm. The key went into her coat pocket. The weight of it was solid and specific and real. That evening, she went to the tower one final time. She carried something wrapped in cloth. The stairs were the same stairs, stone, curved, cold, but the door at the top was open, the latch clean, the dust on the threshold disturbed by recent passage. The clock was still ticking on the mantelpiece, small and precise and relentless. Dorian stood by the window. Not in the chair. The window. She had never seen him anywhere in the tower except that chair. Nell set the cloth bundle on the desk. She unwrapped it carefully. Margaret's dress lay inside, folded along its original lines. The hem had been torn, a small thing, invisible unless you knew where to look. She had found it when she moved the dress from the form to examine the fabric. The tear was at the back, 3 inches of split seam where the silk had weakened with age. She had repaired it. The stitching was her own, tight, even, matched to the original weave so precisely that the mend was invisible. You had to run your finger along the hem to feel the difference, and even then you had to know what you were feeling for. She hung the dress back on the form. "I did not touch anything else," she said. "Only the hem." Dorian looked at the dress, at the repaired hem, at the mend that was not there to see. His jaw tightened. His hands closed at his sides, then opened. "She would have liked you," he said. "She would have liked that someone mended it," Nell said. "That is different." He was quiet for a moment. The clock ticked. The shadows in the tower room were lighter than before. Not gone, not banished, but thinner, as though 40 years of accumulated darkness had been diluted by the lamp, the open door, the sound of time moving again. The room was still cold, but it was a different cold. The cold of a room that had been opened, not the cold of a room sealed against the world. She kept everything, he said. Not to Nell, exactly. To the room, to the dress. She said a house should hold its history. She was right, Nell said. But history should be tended, not preserved in amber. He looked at her then. The amber of his eyes was steadier in this light than it had been in the dark. Less lit from within, more simply present. The east roof, he said. Before winter. I know, she said. I will arrange the inspection. She took the lamp. She descended the stairs. Behind her, the clock ticked on. The study was warm by the time she reached it. Mrs. Aldrin had built the fire up. The dead grate from weeks ago was a memory now. The room held heat, held light, held the smell of coal and old paper, and the particular dusty warmth of a house being used again. Nell sat at the desk. She opened the estate ledger to a new page. The master key sat beside the inkwell. The original deeds were in the cabinet behind her, properly stored, oilcloth wrapped, filed in the order she had established, accessible to anyone with the authority to ask for them. Mrs. Aldrin set a cup of tea at her elbow. 1 cup. The magistrate's clerk sent a note, Mrs. Aldrin said. Proctor's man, the one in the estate office, has been taken in for examination. Good, Nell said. Will you need anything else tonight? No, thank you, Mrs. Aldrin. The housekeeper withdrew. The fire settled. Dorian stood at the study window, not the tower, the study. Downstairs, in the inhabited part of the house, in a room with a fire and a lamp and the smell of ink. He was looking at the grounds in the fading light. The shadows around his figure were long and still. They did not shift with the dying sun. They held their shape, anchored to him, steady. He did not take tea. He did not sit. The east roof needs inspection before winter, he said. Nell dipped the pen. She wrote the notation in the ledger. East roof, inspection, pre-winter. The ink was dark and even. The letters were her own hand, precise, unhurried, the hand of a woman who had kept accounts for 8 years and knew the difference between a record made in haste and one made with care. She set the pen down. She picked it up again. She added the date. Above them, through the stone and the timber and the long, cold distance of the tower stairs, the clock ticked, small, precise, steady, the sound of time moving again in a house that had forgotten how. The pen moved. The ink dried.